Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Today I want to talk about ammunition. How can we store it? How can we use it safely? And how can we have enough for whatever needs we may face? If you're interested in this topic, well, stick with me for a minute because I'll be right back. Okay, 5 important considerations for the ammo that you buy and you store. And before we even get into this numbered list, let's just say right up front, there's no such thing as too much ammunition. It doesn't matter whether you're in a civilian self-defense position, law enforcement, if you're prepping for who knows what can happen along the road in this country, have plenty of ammunition. We also know it's a good idea to buy it because this system has ups and downs. We've seen a couple of fairly serious ammunition shortages over the last decade or so. So having a good supply of ammunition on hand kind of smooths that out. So when it's available, buy it. Now by all means shop around and get the best price you can. Don't pay cutthroat prices for things unless you have to. But have as much ammunition as you can afford. And 2 basic kinds of ammunition for any gun you're going to use for self-defense. You're going to need training ammo. And you're going to need carry ammo. So sort out what you're going to need ahead of time. The bulk of what you're probably going to spend your money on is going to be training ammo, but make sure you have more than enough adequate duty grade loads to get you by. If you're a reloader, you can get more bang for your buck, but the same problems have cropped up in reloading. We've seen primer shortages that are amazing. We've seen primers go up 2 to 3 times the price they were just a few years ago. And so far those prices don't look to be coming down. Powder now is at least double what we have paid for it in the past. And we know that lead and copper prices have gone up, so the projectiles that we're going to use to reload are going to be bad as well. One piece of advice I would give to you, if you're going to have 9mm as your primary carry gun, I said have training ammo and have carry ammo. Don't do what I've done. Over the years as a gun writer, I've had lots and lots of free samples come in from various manufacturers. Some good and some bad. So I have a crazy collection of various, especially handgun calibers. I try to use that as training ammo because I'm still going to pick my number 1 carry ammo, and it's very rarely those samples that have accumulated over the years. So I burn up a lot of those in training. Don't have a complicated shelf for 9mm, we will say. Get the 2 loads you need and stock up on those 2 as much as you can and get rid of any oddball stuff that you're not going to use. That's good stuff to use for training. Alright, number 1, how do you store your ammo? I've seen people on YouTube say that, oh, don't ever leave it in cardboard boxes that can discolor the brass and various theories about that. I think it's important that when you buy ammunition, you leave it in its original container as much as you can for storage. Here's bulk storage, M855 stuff. Okay, this comes in an ammo can. There's 30 rounds in a cardboard sleeve. I'd say leave it in that. And I'm going to talk about stripper clips a little later on, why it's good to have some of your 5.56 ammo in stripper clips and what you need to make use of it for rapid loading. Here's an example of a buffalo bore. These are some heavy 10mm loads. They put them up in very deep, very isolated styrofoam containers. Very good way to protect that ammunition. It's never going to go off. It's going to be protected in a fire, which I will talk about a little bit later too. Here's another example with some Black Hills rifle ammunition. Sometimes you'll see styrofoam containers down here to hold these rounds, sometimes plastic. Keep them in those racks, keep them in the boxes as much as possible. I think that's the best way to store your ammunition as it comes from the factory. Now you can put it on shelves, but when you do that, you're subjected to humidity, other moisture concerns, if there's a fire. Plus, how do you grab and go? If you need to get the ammo out of there for some reason, say there is a fire, or it's a grab and go situation and, you know, shit hits the fan, you got to grab couple cans of ammo and go. It's good to have it in cans. I'm not going to put them on the table here. I'll show you some examples. Good old steel military ammo cans are probably the best. Some ammunition still comes in them. You can buy them. They used to be dirt cheap. They're not anymore. You can get them at Harbor Freight. You can get them at some gun stores and surplus centers. There are plastic ammo cans out there now, and I'll show you a couple examples of those. Those work well too. And it's a good idea to just stuff your ammo in there. If it's going to be long term, this is stuff you're going to put away for war reserve. There's a little trick I learned, and that's to open up your ammo can, get some dry ice. That's solid carbon dioxide. A lot of grocery stores have a small freezer up by where you will pay or go in and out the doors. You can buy dry ice. You don't need hardly any, but open your ammo can up. Put just a chunk of dry ice. It's good to put a couple pieces of cardboard or something there to keep the intense cold away from the ammunition. Lay that chunk of carbon dioxide on there and let it sublimate, which means that this stuff does not get wet. As temperature warms it up, it goes directly from a solid to a gas. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so when it's laying on that ammunition can, that carbon dioxide gas will settle down in and displace the regular air, which means it's displacing oxygen. Once that's warmed up completely, you're satisfied that there's no more sublimation going on, then you very carefully close that lid and snap it down, and now you have sealed that ammunition in an oxygen-free environment. That's as long-term storage as you can make it, and it's a fairly inexpensive process to go through. In talking about storage, one variation that I will throw out there is if you're not necessarily going to be able to put something in a guaranteed dry area, you can take it out of the boxes and vac pack it. If you have a little food processing backpacker, here's 50 rounds of 230 hollow points that I have bulk packed. This can go then in an ammunition can. It's not so important that you need to CO2 load that can, because this is pretty well sealed from oxygen. So that would protect you from moisture. If you're going to put it in, if you're going to store it in a camper, you're going to store it in a cabin that you're going to go to, someplace like that, and then vac packing the ammo is a good way to keep it even better protected. One of the ammo cans I'll show you is a can of M2 ball for my M1 Garand. And this full military container, 384 rounds of 30-06 ammo for the Garand. It's already in clips. It's in bandoliers. You used to be able to get these cans from, back in my day, Director of Civilian Marksmanship, DCM clubs. Now it would be under civilian marksmanship. But I haven't seen these kind of cans come out for a long time. So this is the last full can I have. And I'll crack it open today. It's been CO2 sealed, but I can do that back. This stuff is 1969, LC69 ammunition. It is as bright and shiny. It is as powerful as it ever was, okay? And that's because it's been properly stored. So ammunition which is properly stored can last for decades. The only thing you want to watch for is if you're thinking about an M1, don't get a rare can of old stuff that you might find that Grandpa had, dated in the 40s or early 50s, because that can be corrosive primers. And we lived with corrosive primers for a long time during the war, but they were cleaning their rifles. They knew they had to clean them as much as they possibly could because those corrosive salts would ruin the barrel. About 1953, I believe, was when most military small arms ammunition changed over to non-corrosive primers. So make sure your dates are 55 or newer, and you'll be all right there. One difference is U.S. carbine ammunition. For the M1 carbine, the little short 30 caliber rounds, they were concerned about the gas system in that rifle. So even though they were not 100% reliable, that cartridge has always been loaded with non-corrosive primers. So any military stuff, even getting dated back in the 40s, that's not going to rot out your barrel or your gas system. One other aspect of storage is store your ammunition away from any hot areas, any high humidity areas, and away from any potential solvents. In other words, keep it away from your cleaning bench where you're using gun solvents, oils. WD-40 is almost like a penetrating oil in terms of ammunition. It can seep in around the edges of the primer, and if that oil gets into that primer at all, it's going to nullify that primer. It will not go bang reliably, or you may get a half power fire, which is going to cause a hang fire. So store it where it's cool, dry, and away from any kind of solvents. Okay, number 2, make sure you have enough ammunition that's ready to go at a moment's notice. Whatever your carry weapons are, I suggest you have several magazines for that, and you can keep them loaded. Some people are afraid that if you keep ammo loaded for long term, that the magazine springs can take a set. It's not going to be reliable for feeding from that point on. I've seen people try to do this over a period of years and do a test. I've done a couple of inadvertent tests. I had some 45 magazines loaded one time when I moved. I didn't find them till several years later, and they'd probably been loaded for a couple of years before I moved. So instead of unloading them, I took those magazines that had been sitting there full for quite a while, went to the range. They worked perfectly. And they've continued to work perfectly ever since. So I think the idea of a magazine spring set is overdone. If you're worried about it, then you can have multiple magazines, keep some loaded at a given time, enough for what your needs would be. Keep some spares that are empty, and then rotate them periodically so they're only loaded half the time. As a police officer, I always had 4 magazines for my primary duty gun, but I only carried 3, 1 in the pistol, 2 spares on my belt. The 4th magazine would sit empty. A month later, I would rotate them, so there was always 1 setting empty. I don't know if it needed to be done, but it didn't hurt anything, and it didn't cost that much. It gave me a little bit of peace of mind, I guess. So it doesn't hurt anything. A way to fill magazines, especially for the 5.56, or the only other one that I can think of that's readily available for this, is the M1 carbine, which we don't see in use much, but actually an M1 carbine, especially with soft point ammo, is not a bad little home defense weapon. And that's the use of stripper clips. Now the M1 carbines, and this is some pretty grungy old ammo, they came with a guide on them. Okay, so the guide would just slip down. There was a guide on every clip. That would sit over the top of the magazine, and you just feed those down in. So the M1 carbine is one possible way to do that. You can more readily, it's the magazines for the M16 series, 5.56. You can buy this ammo already in clips for your training ammo. It's usually not that much more expensive. With that, you need a separate clip guide. These are available at surplus stores, gun shows, wherever. You just need a few of them around to have on hand. They fit very readily on the old original aluminum magazines. And most of the plastic magazines, now this is a PMag. I am not familiar with all the plastic magazines. If you've got one that won't take the stripper clip guide, then I think I would go for the PMags. They're reasonably priced. They're really good magazines. With that, and there's a little tab here that you can open up, makes it a little bit easier. But now I can pull 10 rounds at a time into that 30 round magazine. So that's just got 10. 2 more clips and you're full. And then get that stripper clip off there, the guide off there, and go to the next magazine. They're a little tight on these PMags. They're probably going to have to wear in because I don't use them that often. A lot of times we're just loading bulk training ammo out on the range, but it's not a bad idea to have several magazines loaded, ready to go. And then you can have extra magazines and extra ammunition in stripper clips, and you can pop those magazines full pretty quickly. So have enough magazines, have enough ammo ready to go for more than you expect that you're going to need in a fight. Number 3 on ammo considerations. Don't load and unload a pistol or a semi-auto rifle constantly if there's any way to avoid that. A lot of police officers will unload when they get home. They'll load back up in the morning when they go to work. There's another thing about loading a pistol. Do not just put a loose round into the chamber of a semi-auto and then drop the slide. I'm going to drop it slowly. And you see, it's not going into battery. That extractor has to pop out around that rim to be able to pull it out of the chamber. It's not going to break it the first time you do it, but it could eventually break it, especially in older designs like a 1911. Popping that extractor out around from a round that's just loosely placed in the chamber is going to eventually cause a problem. The proper way to load these is insert the magazine, drop the slide. Now it does go into battery, and then we top off with the new round. And it's that cycle where cops especially get in trouble with. They're doing that every morning when they go to work and rotating those top 2 rounds. And after several trips up the feed ramp, that bullet can be deep-seated. And if it gets deep-seated, then the chamber pressures go astronomically high. It can blow up a pistol or can severely damage a pistol, and it can even result in some injury to the shooter. So if that bullet gets deep-seated at all, you need to throw that round away. That means you need to check your stuff periodically. But my recommendation is don't cycle those rounds. Don't load and unload the weapon any more than you have to. When you bring it home, if you're carrying concealed or if you're a police officer carrying a duty weapon home, have a safe place to put it, a safe or some kind of drawer that's up too high for children to get to, however you're going to satisfy yourself. Have a safe place to put it. Don't load and unload it every day unless you absolutely have to. So if you're going to leave for the day, you're going to do a press check. I can see the brass in there. This particular pistol has a loaded chamber indicator. I believe that's mandatory in California, so you probably all have those. So I can feel right there, I know there's something in that chamber, or I can pull back far enough to see that it's there. That does not deep seat the bullet. It's when it goes up the feed ramp into the chamber repeatedly that you're going to deep seat that bullet. Okay? Another tip, when you're unloading these things, don't catch it in your hand. Don't open the slide and cup your hand around there and catch that. Sometimes, it has happened, it can get partially ejected, and then when you slip with the slide, it can the primer can be hit by the extractor or some other thing in there, and it can go off. When that cartridge goes off outside the chamber, generally they don't hurt you, but when you're that much close contact to you, it can. So the best idea is to just eject those things out, let them fall to the floor. We can pick them up, lock it open, make sure it's safe. In terms of loading and unloading, there can also be a problem developed with a 5.56 cartridge. I'll show you a close-up of this, but those of you who have chambered around in a 5.56, an AR-15 M16 platform, they have a floating firing pin. So when that round gets chambered, that floating firing pin floats forward and hits the primer in the process of chambering. That's why 5.56 ammunition uses a slightly different primer than a commercial .223 Remington does. That's why 5.56 ammo is better to shoot in there. It's a little bit harder cup for the primer, so it's able to resist that touching in the chambering process. I've heard of several, but I know one firsthand of an officer in Iowa, and apparently their department required loading and unloading every day. So he drew his AR-15 patrol rifle, he loaded it, was going out to the car to go on patrol, and in the process of just chambering around, round fired. Now he swore up and down that the safety was on, he didn't get his finger on the trigger, that there was no problem that way. His allegation was that that round had been chambered so many rounds and so many dozens of repeat light strikes in that chambering process. His contention was the cartridge was sensitized by all those hits and fired just by the act of chambering. I know one ammunition that was concerned about this, and they had some of their people just keep chambering 5.56 loads that they produced, and they could never get it to go off that way. If you're shooting .223 ammo in there that has that slightly softer primer cup, I suppose it's possible that after dozens and dozens of chambering cycles that you might get one to go off, but I don't think we have reliably proven that that can happen. That officer made that allegation, his union stuck up for him, and I believe it was just dismissed and no one did any research to back it up. The point is, as much as you can, load these things, leave them loaded, and avoid repeated chambering of any given cartridge a number of times. And we'll avoid that kind of problem. Our number 4 issue that I want to talk about, and this is something I've never seen much. This dates back to my earlier years when I started out as a firefighter. Dirty little secret in my past. Then I came over to the dark side to be a cop because they told me I could, drive fast cars, shoot cool guns, get in a fight once in a while. So that and the fact that I got laid off from the fire service when they closed the station. What happens when ammunition is subjected to fire? And I've heard this topic dealt with periodically. Early in my shooting career, there was a pretty good gun shop kind of the next town over from us. And we go there regularly and, dicker on guns, buy ammunition. They had a fire in that building. And I know I was a firefighter at the time. And the Pekin Fire Department was very reluctant to go in and fight that fire as an interior attack because they could hear ammo popping off in there. So I got interested in, at that time, I did some research. There's a book out there called Hatcher's Notebook by General Julian Hatcher. It's an old book. It's probably out of print. But if you really want to know some great history, especially military side, the history of the M1 rifle, things of that sort, get a copy of Hatcher's Notebook. At one point, the Army did a lot of research on what happens when cartridges go off by fire. And here are some examples. As a firefighter, I mean, I would be in there generally air pack and hose stream with another firefighter attacking a fire, and we'd hear these rounds cooking off sometimes. And it's a little unsettling. It's not as loud as a full discharge of a weapon, but it's a pretty good pop when you hear it. And you can see, I'll give you some close-up of these. Here was some blank. This is blanks probably for an M60 machine gun. Blank powder is very dangerous because blank powder will build up considerable pressure without having a bullet that's passing down the bore. So these are probably the most dangerous kind of rounds you can encounter in there. And you can see that this case is pretty well blown up. But the others, if you notice, the cases are intact, but the primers are missing because those primers are just held in by friction. And primers are a very brisant is the word the explosives people use. It's a very violent kind of explosive. And it doesn't take much to be pretty impressive. Just, I believe, a week ago at the Winchester-Olin ammunition plant in East Alton, Illinois, an entire truckload of shotgun primers exploded, detonated. And shotgun primers are, any kind of primers, never store them outside of the containers they come in. Those containers are designed so that if a primer goes off, it shouldn't set the whole load off. But somehow an entire truckload of shotgun primers went off down in southwestern Illinois, killed the driver of the truck. But normally when these things go off, it's the primer that goes off. Primer can fire the powder then, but the primers, a lot of times, if they're not restrained in a chamber of a weapon, the primers themselves will shoot out. And it looks as though, the powder's gone. So it ignited that blank powder, but it mostly just shot out the front and didn't do any damage. But this one particular cartridge did explode. But you notice all the primers are missing. Here's another. This looks to be a 7.62 by 51 round, or 308. And again, primer's gone. The bullet gave enough resistance to build some pressure in there. But generally what happens is if this is not supported by the chamber of the weapon, the case will blow out the sides. Now there will be little shards of brass case that blow out. The bullet will project forward to some extent, but the research the Army did said, unless you have this stuff in your hand, it's probably not going to hurt you. I mentioned not cupping that round when you empty the chamber of a semi-automatic pistol, because if you slip and the extractor were to hit that primer and set it off, with your hand wrapped around it, that cartridge is outside the chamber, so it's going to act like it would if it detonated by fire. But there are going to be little shards of brass case blowout, and the projectile will blow forward with a little bit of speed. So you're going to hurt your hand. You're not going to blow your hand off if you catch one unchambering, but that's what can happen. So whenever these are fired outside of the chamber of a weapon, they're not that serious a threat. Here's a shotgun shell. This is a 20 gauge shotgun shell. You can see it's melted. The primer did not fire. And the powder, I believe, is still in there. So this was simply a case of getting hot enough to melt the plastic case even before that primer detonated. And these were not stolen from fires. I asked the people permission when I took them. Buddy and I were in a fire one time, and we heard a pretty substantial boomf next to us. So we knew that a round had gone off, but I'd heard them before, and this was considerably more powerful. After the fire was out, took the owner in there. I said, "Did you have some kind of large caliber cartridge case in there that went off? Because I heard it go boom." And he goes, "Yeah, I got an old 50 caliber that my dad brought back from World War II." And so we found it. Primer actually stayed to some extent. It just blew out the base of the primer, as you can see. I'll show you close-ups of this. blew out the sides of this case. Now you're lighting 250 grains of powder behind a 700 or 800 grain bullet. We never found the bullet, but this definitely sounded like a small grenade going off. So a 50, or especially if somebody had a live round of 20 millimeter or something like that, that could be serious. But the point to it is, if these cartridges are not in the chamber of a weapon when they detonate, they're not exactly injury free, but they're really not that much of a threat to you unless you are very, very close to them or holding one in your hand. Now, if there is a loaded firearm in a fire and it gets hot enough to cook off that round in there, it's going to project out the end of that barrel just as if you had pulled the trigger on it normally. So that does pose a pretty good threat. But protect these things from fire as much as you can, but understand that, you know, this is not a machine gun gallery in there when these things are cooking off in your house or in a place of business. They're kind of frightening, but they're not really much of a danger to you. All right, number 5 of ammo safety considerations here. Don't use live ammo to function test your weapon. If you're going to dry fire, make sure you don't have any live ammo anywhere close to you. Because you can get an unexpected loud noise. I have twice in my career when I thought I was dry firing, and a lot of times I'm practicing other things at the same time. If you're going to practice malfunction clearing, especially slide latch on, if you're going to cycle a slide with one hand, you know, hook the rear side on your belt or a boot or something like that, and punch it like that, don't use live ammo. Get yourself some dummy ammo for the cartridge you need. In fact, I have dummy ammo for every weapon I own, every caliber that I have in my inventory. Those are 45s. Sometimes they're just plastic. Here's a 5.56 one that's just plastic. I make them even for my hunting rifles, and the way I make them is I reload. So I make up a dummy with no primer, no powder, and the bullet's seated and crimped to the normal depth. Same thing, 45-70 for the big lever gun. I can function check that. I can practice with working the action to get it down. If I ever use this on dangerous game, I want to be pretty handy with it. So it's good to practice, but don't practice with live ammo, because you can break something that you don't expect. That's if you follow the safety rules, and one of those rules says never let the muzzle cover anything you're not willing to destroy. The bad thing is if you get one of these unexpected loud noises when you're practicing or malfunction clearing and you're in a house and that round does go off, it may not break anything that you're worried about until it goes through a wall and then breaks a family member. So that's an important safety consideration. So if you're dry firing, if you're doing repair to a weapon and you're going to function check it, if you're practicing malfunction drills, there's a lot of reasons why you should have dummy rounds. You can buy them in most calibers, including shotgun shells. It's a very worthwhile investment to have those dummy rounds when you're training with a weapon and you're not doing live fire. If you're going to use live ammo to do those things, then you need to do that kind of training on a firing range where it's safe to do so. This is not a long video. I hope I've given you some good information, maybe something you haven't thought about in terms of ammunition storage or ammunition safety. If you like what I'm doing here, I'd appreciate a thumbs up or subscribe, and we'll get some more material to you soon. Thank you.
Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.